Hi, everyone. My name is John McDonald, and you're listening to Everything is Gay, Even the Straight Stuff, our marathon 4 episode session about Once Upon a Time that we did not intend to make 4 episodes. Is finally coming to a close today. Much like the show itself, it's finally coming to a close, probably after a little longer than anybody expected. I'm here
Mhm.
again with my lovely, fabulous, magnetic, magic believing co-host who probably totally would have helped save New York if he had been there. Magnus, hello.
Hello. And question is, exactly what am I saving it from? Is
I
it the dark one this time? Is it the black fairy, etc.? Who
Yeah.
knows?
Well, so in the I referenced that because we still have a little bit left to say about the season 5 finale, and then I think we can do season 6 and 7 pretty easily today, and then have time for wrap up. At the end of season 5 is that two-parter that we kind of left out on. This is the two-parter where they're two distinct episodes, not a two-parter where it's one episode that happens over 2 hours, which is a distinction that you have to make with Once Upon a Time. And this is also going to kind of showcase the weakness of season 6, the first half, where it's a
Mm.
lot about Rumple trying to basically save Belle, even though Belle doesn't want to be saved. So there's a lot of Rumple in the first half, and then the second half is all Emma and Henry. And Henry, of course, is the biggest weakness of Once Upon a Time for me, for a lot of it. I do like the idea that in the New York Library there is a black colored Holy Grail, which sounds amazing and spooky. And in a better
Mm.
version of the show, I think I probably would have enjoyed it more.
Mm.
Yeah, and so there's two things to talk about. Oh, you look like you're about to say something. So
I was just going to ask, we're starting to talk about this two-parter for the end of season five. Um, are we then going to touch upon quickly the other points that we had from season five as well
yeah,
afterwards?
and I think they lead into season 6. And it's
Mm.
a question that I have because the people that created Once Upon a Time ought to talk about this show in terms of that it's a showcase for hope. But at the end of season 5, now they're revealing magic to the world essentially, which feels like a very heroes-ish thing to do.
Mm.
I don't know if I agree with it as a season finale, but that's neither here nor there. But it seems like a lot of the second half of the show, where the ratings really start to slide, hope starts to
Mm.
manifest in terms of finding redemption. It was almost like they couldn't figure out what to do with hope as a physical thing, and so they decided to manifest it as redemption. Do you think the show was really about redemption over hope? Do you think that redemption is manifestation of hope? Like, how do you think hope and redemption kind of tie together?
Mm. It's interesting. I suppose the thing is, we're dealing a lot of the main cast are villains, or well, reformed villains. You've got the Evil Queen, Regina. You've got Hook, Rumpel. Very interesting case. Always at least a grey character, if not going back to his darker roots. It was only really going into the very end of season 6, slightly touched upon, and then, well, fully into season 7 when they are trying to bring about his sort of good side, especially when they did the reveal of the fact is that this version of the characters also are references to the main characters from Up, which I feel they kind of shoehorned in for season 7.
Well,
It
they also shoehorn in Maui's magic fish hook as a kind of last MacGuffin. So they're not out of the realm of shoehorning things. And anyone that's watched once is like, okay, it's the Frozen season. We're shoehorning in Anna and Elsa. So
a very true point indeed. But going back to the whole redemption thing, I think for a lot of the reformed villains, their hope is very much tied to the concept of redemption. And you can see it a little bit as well with Emma, because Emma's journey was finding herself, but a lot of it was also sort of a kind of redemption for herself of redeeming her belief in herself and the fact that she could actually love other people after going through so much trauma in her earlier life. So you don't necessarily need to have redemption hope keyed together, but it does feel definitely towards the end of Once Upon a Time that redemption played a much bigger role in it. With Regina, it was sort of always there, but then you start to see it through with Hook, with his whole thing that he went through of revealing that he killed David's father. Well, Charming, sorry. Um, he
He
killed
killed
Charming's father.
David and James's father, whose name
Yes.
is Robert. So David and James' father's name is Robert.
Mm.
The King Midas is named King George, and so George was their stepfather who had a lot of money, and Robert was the father who was the farmer who had no money.
Well, he wasn't really a stepfather; he was an adopted father. He adopted he adopted James and then Charming. But sorry, I'm doing semantics here. I know
No,
what
that's
you're
fine.
meaning.
So
um,
it's interesting
but,
too because the evil queen who is manifested at the end of season 5 gets a redemption arc in season
mm,
7. So there'll even be the idea of redemption for an unredeemable character, in essence. And I'm very excited to talk about that when we get to it because I think the evil queen is a really interesting character because she's not wishverse. She's a manifestation of something, and then we see that happen again with Mr. Gold, um, in a way, in a different way. So the she's not the wishverse queen. She is the evil queen, but
yes.
she's like, it's not like she's a TVA character. This isn't Marvel's TVA of Loki. This is like she's literally just like, it feels almost like the Land of Untold Stories is there partially to make this evil queen
Mm,
Parent Trap Regina version happen, and also to give Zelena something to do because Zelena doesn't have anything to do in season 6 outside of what she does with the evil queen. Essentially, is what it
mm,
feels like to me.
yes. Um, no, well, if you thought you did have enough evil cream before, you've got two of them technically now running around causing mischief.
Look,
um,
Regina is such an iconic, amazing evil queen because she really threw herself into it. Anyone that's watched Why Women Kill season 2 sees that Lana
yeah.
can do this with any character.
Mm,
But I think just how they frame the cleavage, like how breast
oh,
forward the evil
David.
queen is, it just makes it because like everyone else that is wearing kind of that Storybrooke Enchanted Forest costume,
Mm,
except for maybe on David, it all feels kind of forced. Like when I see Mary Margaret in like any of her period piece clothing, it just feels like it's Mary Margaret wearing an outfit. When Lana Parilla as
mm,
Regina, as the Evil Queen, is wearing the outfit, it feels like she's actually wearing an extension of her personality and an armor.
yes.
Um, yeah,
An armor, but also a statement, because Regina knew she was attractive and she claimed her attractiveness. And, in a way, she almost flaunted herself, but in every aspect, not just her body, her personality, her power, because it's an aspect that she could show of her control. And for Regina and the Evil Queen, being in control of themselves was always the big thing with them, and they didn't like it. That was why, in the end of season 1, beginning of season 2, they were so desperate to get their magic back. Um, Not just they were afraid for their safety, but also to start to have some control back in their lives. That was how she was thinking that she was going to get Henry back, was by having the magic. Um,
and ironically,
so,
the two
yeah.
sexiest characters are the only ones that claim their sexuality. Because I would say that Regina and Hook are the sexiest characters in the cast, and they're the ones that are the most provocatively sexy too.
To just briefly touch upon what you were saying before we go back to redemption. Um, no, I totally agree. I think when David Charming wears his princely clothing, he feels different from when he is David in Storybrooke. He plays the role of the prince really well. With our characters, Rumple, Zelena, they do look the part when they're in their fairy tale getup, but they actually physically look different. Like what I mean is, in like Rumple's skin, they make it more sparkly, going
Yeah.
into mild Twilight territory there. But they
Hey,
make him look
actually,
like.
when I think about Rumple in that gold, it always seems like Robert Carlyle was making a choice to make him more animalistic, so he never really looks human. But I find it goes so far. It's kind of like the melodrama of season 6, and I'm going to explain a bit what melodrama is when we get there. But it
Yeah.
feels like he always takes it farther, and it's taken so far that it distracts from the good he does as the character being this kind of cryptic insane person that has like been golemized by magic.
Mm,
And I think for me that distraction is kind of where I start to get lost because it feels like people are playing roles rather than being who they are. Not that I mind it, like I know what I'm watching. It's Once Upon a Time, it's a
yes.
fairy tale show. Like it's not like it's Glee where all of a sudden Mr. Schuster is Gollum. That would have been both off-putting and distracting. But some people would say he claims that title anyways. But so season
Yeah.
5, this 2-hour special, magic is revealed to the world, and then nothing comes of it. Is another part of it is that it feels like magic is arbitrarily allowed to stay secret because I guess people don't want to trek from New York to Maine to find this town. Like it feels like there should have been much larger ramifications in season 6 than the ones that actually took place from the finale of season 5,
Mhm.
where Henry essentially pulls an elf from Elf, getting people to believe in Santa again. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, so to briefly touch on Henry, um, the fact is, the annoying thing with Henry is he really did go back and forth on the whole magic issue a bit too wildly, from what I remember. He was built to be the truest believer, and he had this great thing being of imagination and everything. I mean, that became a MacGuffin almost towards the end of season 7, when the fact is that he needed to believe again as an adult, and he didn't have the ability to really do so until he reconnected with his younger self. Um, but the thing is, he would be the truest believer. He'd be really into magic and getting magic back in fairy tales, but a few times he went a total 180 and basically became almost as puritanical as that anti-magic agency from the end of season 2, wanting to destroy magic. I just feel his motivations flipped away a bit too easily back and forth sometimes.
It's unlike Emma, where when Emma doesn't believe in magic, and in fact, Emma's arc at the end of season 7 is strongest at the very end of season 7. But when Emma doesn't believe in magic, it makes more sense because she's had this life where it's been really hard, and she hasn't had a real chance at fairy tale ending, even with Neil. Whereas it feels like for Henry, because his life is so touched by magic, when he doesn't believe in magic, it's very shocking. But they never really use
Mm,
that for a shock because the only real time when he's cursed to not believe in magic, he's brought out of it because he's needed. Like there's never a time when he has to I feel like there's never a time when he has to actively choose to not believe in magic to save someone. It's like people are either always awakening
mm,
him or they're using him to be a kind of other savior that's not Emma. And it's just, I feel like Henry is necessary for the show, sadly, but also is the weakest part of Once Upon a Time for me. And I'm
mm.
sure people love Henry and they hate me for saying that. But to be honest, if there was no Henry, except for bringing Emma to Storybrooke and getting her to stay in season 1, does he stay necessary to the plot? I don't know if I think so. Um, I think
Mm,
other characters could have done the things that he did
mm.
in some cases. I think Emma could have given the speech in New York just as easily as Henry did, and I think it could have been more believable coming from someone from the real world, which is essentially what Emma was. She's a fairy tale character, but she's essentially from the real world because she didn't
Yes.
really ever live
Mhm.
in the Enchanted Forest, like as a character.
They went on a lot about Henry being sort of the bridge almost between the real and magical worlds. I mean, that was why Emma had to stay with him. I think it was midway through season 3. Well, or was it the end of season? I'm trying to remember now. Yes, it was midway through season 3 when Peter Pan's curse took everyone back to the Enchanted Forest with a bit of genius meddling. He had to stay because he'd been born. Wasn't he born? Wait, what was the thing about him again? It
And here's
was
part of the problem is that you have to think this through. It's not something you could easily recall as a deep fan of the show. Like you actually have to think this through too.
But sorry, going back to what you were saying, I do get what your point is. Emma almost comes across as a more believable bridge between the magic and fantastical worlds.
I do wonder if Regina's story of finding redemption, hope, and loving could have been stronger without Henry. Because they use Henry a lot in a way to get her to reveal her ability to be caring and loving and motherly. But they could have had her learn how to be a partner to Robin. Like at a certain point, they could have easily had Robin Hood helping her to discover how to love others. Because Robin Hood had to learn that too. And so there's a certain point where she doesn't really need Henry for that anymore. But they keep going back to the Regina and Henry like mom well. And at a certain point, it's like we've done this before a couple of times, and it just like at a certain point, isn't Henry 15? Isn't this kind of weird even for like someone who is a fairy tale character by association? Isn't it kind of weird he's still doing this at 15? It's kind of like Curtin Finn and Glee. Like it's weird and it just shouldn't
well,
like it shouldn't have even been a thing.
You have to have a look at the point of the fact is, to Henry, these fairy tales are at that age, at that point, these fairy tales are actually reality. They're not fantastical. So in a sense, it's more like he's just dealing with the existence he's in, if that makes sense. But I mean, I do get your point, and they did kind of slightly how do I put this? They did slightly lean into that, mocking him slightly because I remember in season 7 they made him out as an author that had written the Once Upon a Time book, and that was almost like tongue-in-cheek about him writing it, but he didn't seem like a totally great believer in fairy tales. I felt that was a little bit of a nice touch. Although, again, see, a lot of the points you said about Henry, I do agree with you. I do think he has some saving graces here and there. Like, for example, the lovely tongue-in-cheek thing that he made basically Regina and Emma his two moms and everything. But I do think that sometimes they were slightly struggling to find something for him to do. And I'm not sure they should have made him one of the key components of season 7. Because
I have thoughts about season 7, and I think we should do them for season 7 because I think they'll all tie together nicely.
So let's wrap up our thoughts on season 5 then, so we can start to move on. We can move forward. We're into talking about season 6 and the Land of Untold Stories.
So, by the way, for season 5 in 2016, it had a 6.32 million viewers, as opposed to season 1 had 11.71, and it had a 69 viewer rank out of all the shows that were being watched at the time. And it doesn't get better. It went from 11.71 to 6.32. By the time we get to season 7, the viewership has dropped even farther to 3.41 million. So in season 6, we have a pretty significant drop off to 4.39. So like 2 million people thereabout just kind of stopped watching once from season 5 to season 6.
And that is admittedly not just probably the quality of season 5. I'll have to admit, by that point, Once very much was a fan show. If you were say you were a new viewer and you were like, oh, I want to try it Once Upon a Time. Oh, there's an episode on TV, a random episode from season 5. You sit down, you watch it. You probably don't have a bloody clue what's going on at that point with like all of this background. And unfortunately, that was one of the strengths and weaknesses of Once as a concept.
And here's something. Oh yeah, go ahead. Finish your thought. Yeah, finish your thought.
I was going to say it's like a book. you cannot start midway through or even towards the end and not be totally lost. Once is very much a storybook. You have to go from the very beginning and go through. It's not like a comedy where you can really slot yourself in somewhere, and if you don't get a few references, that's it. It's you have to go from the very beginning.
Yeah, one of the strengths of so here's where I'm going to talk a little bit about some technical language. So when you think about the idea of a soap opera, which some people have called once like a fairy tale soap opera, but a
Mm,
soap opera is made so that you can drop in like once a month, and the plot lines are kind of both familiar and new enough with different characters that at a certain point they become interchangeable. The reason The Bold and the Beautiful has been around for like 30 something years is because it's pretty predictable. You kind of know what's going to happen. You know it's going to be about this family that owns this big corporation and all the infighting and things. But
mm,
there's a familiarity and you can drop into it. You can't really just drop into Once Upon a Time, especially to the point in season five, season six. Um, and in the case of Once Upon a Time, people often mislabel it as soap opera, but they also don't understand that it's actually got some soap opera to it in that it utilizes both forms of melodrama. And so
mm,
melodrama is hallmarked by this kind of heightened emotion. It has fantastical elements to it without having actual physical magic to it. A lot of it is about body language. A lot of it is about relationship, mostly over story sometimes.
mm.
Um, and so they have that in kind of the dialogue and how people move sometimes, but they also have it in physical location.
Yeah,
Storybrooke, as this idyllic place, is not without, like, there's a purpose behind it. And if you've ever watched like a Universal monster movie from the 40s where everything kind
mm,
of looks very twisted, it's very dark. If you've ever watched a film noir detective movie, if you've ever watched classic pre-war German cinema, they do something called expressionism, where even the
mm.
buildings exhibit the energy and the emotion the characters feel. Um, and that's a whole school of thought, and that is really what melodrama is that
Yeah,
exhibition of emotion, sometimes over plot even. Um, and so it's important when we think about Once Upon a Time. I think of it as more of a melodrama than a soap opera, because I think
yeah.
a soap opera would be more accessible. And in season six, when the story drops off in episode four, before we get to the actual plot of the season, which starts in episode nine, the melodrama doesn't serve it because people are just stabbing people left and right on a ship, and it doesn't mean anything.
Oh,
Like,
the
and that's really hard because in season one, when David's fake wife dies, like that's a really big thing. And by the time we get to season six, people are getting stabbed on the ship left and right by Belle, and nobody's even batting an eyelash. Like, not even Belle, who's a character that is like supposed to care about things like that, and is just I don't remember. Maybe in the episode she feels feelings, but it seems like from like the little blurb on Wikipedia, like, and
yeah.
Belle stabs a whole bunch of people, and we're moving on, kind
Mm.
of thing.
Oh, the Catherine kidnap plot from season one. How
Oh, it's
very
so good.
how,
It makes you miss season one, doesn't it? That's why it had 11 million viewers.
it just feels very Spanish telenovela
Yeah.
when you look at that. Oi, my other half showed me some Spanish telenovela once, and
Oh, it's so
let me
good.
tell you, it was wild. Uh,
Korean dramas are good too. Korean soap operas are amazing. What I really like about this first half of season six, because there's a lot not to love. I love the parallels between Aladdin as a savior and Emma as a savior. I like that there's kind of this masculine Emma and almost a femme Aladdin. I really like um, that. To me, these saviors all kind of share close problems, and I kind of like I've always liked that Emma is slightly more masculine
yeah,
than some of the men in the cast. And I think with Aladdin especially being a savior, you can draw comparisons. I really like I like what Aladdin does. Underutilized, of course, and it feels
yes,
really shoehorned in. But at least it's like something from Golden Age Disney, and it's not like the newest Disney film is bringing us They didn't make the dinosaur from The Good Dinosaur come in, and I'm very happy about that. I thank God for small miracles that it's Aladdin. If it had been like Milo from Atlantis, that would have been cooler. Or Jim Hawkins from Treasure Planet. Like, I wouldn't have been mad. But like, at least Aladdin is not so new that I can't enjoy it as a classic Disney fan.
Indeed. I do agree. By season 6, when they start, when they've announced they're bringing up some new guest star characters, and some people would obviously like go, "Oh no, they're doing more guest characters and such." But you know what? Aladdin, Jasmine, and Co. They actually managed to write them in a quite believable way. Their
Yeah,
inclusion
Jasmine worked.
didn't feel forced.
The reveal of Jasmine, especially
Yes.
as like prodding Snow White to do stuff because Jasmine is like sending her in a direction. I actually think that's total Jasmine and very brilliant. I think
Yeah.
Jasmine was an amazing addition to the cast, and I'm so like mad that I had to deal with Lady Tremaine for like half a season so that I could have Jasmine.
Uh, I do agree that they were underutilized. Unfortunately, the entire first half of season 6 can really be called that, underutilized. The characters, the concepts, etc. Um, and so to just quickly, briefly talk about Aladdin and Co. Even though they underutilized, I liked them and it made sense. And I like the fact that the ones was really trying to take forward their concept of the savior lore a bit and give us a bit more background, like with some past saviors and such. Really give it some meaning. However, yeah, underutilized. At these times, you can really see that there was a struggle, I think, between the writers, the producers, the network, and such, about where the show was going. Um,
Yeah,
so
but they talk about in interviews about how happy they were to do another 2 season format. But the first half of it, up until Changelings, episode 9, feels like pure chaos. Feels like they were just trying to stick stuff against the wall to figure out what they wanted for
yeah,
season 6.
it did feel like so. And let's see. Da, 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 da. So they introduced the land of untold stories, and the evil queen came out and made this big dramatic reveal about it and said, "Oh, you're in for it now. There's a lot of people that whose stories haven't finished yet, and a lot of skeletons in the closet, and they're coming for you." And that actually had some weight to it, and
That would have been really cool. Very House on
yeah,
Haunted Hill. Like I would have been
yeah.
way into that. That would have been great.
Oh wow! Can you imagine if they'd taken the haunted mansion and include it in some
Well, the
way?
Haunted
Like,
Mansion itself is actually a classic 3 act story structure made manifest in real life. So,
mm,
but that would have been really cool. But the Haunted Mansion, when they've tried to make stories out of it, has not worked as much as the ride itself works as its own
mhm.
thing. I would prefer that over the magic sapling plotline segue that happens. Like, I don't mind that David is being sent on kind of this quest to figure out who killed his father because it mirrors him sending Mary Margaret on a quest to keep her from getting bored in an earlier season as a subplot. And I don't mind the reveal that Hook inadvertently killed um, the dad. I kind of mind that it's shoehorned in with the Hook is going to propose to Emma plot. Like, I don't know that it was necessary to give it that level of melodrama. But there's just so much going on up until the point where we finally get the reveal of the Black Fairy, we finally get where the season is going.
Yeah,
I can't really celebrate Aladdin and Jasmine. Like, and that really frustrates me. Like, I can't properly celebrate season 6, episodes 1 through 8.5, because there's just too much going on. And
yeah,
it doesn't feel like I'm watching a story. It feels like I'm watching characters in Super Smash Brothers fairy tale edition.
but we're coming back to one of the main criticisms of once as a concept. there with the fact of introducing so many characters and there only being so much time
Yeah.
that if they're guest characters, only so much time that they have to sort of have a sort of arc almost
I
and
mean, for
continue through the
me, if you're gonna
episodes.
introduce Edmond Dantes and you're not really gonna keep the Disney canon, why would you bring in Cinderella that you then just have to recast in the next season? Like for me, it's like, okay, then if you're gonna introduce Edmond Dantes as a player of some sort, then just follow that through if you know you're doing a half
Yeah,
season. Don't start bringing us stuff about Cinderella and Tremaine because it's an iconic Disney vignette of so much from Cinderella that has like gone
yeah.
through several different permutations. Like, then just make it. If you're doing the Victorian Italian thing and you're making a big Jekyll Hyde thing, why are we bringing Cinderella into it? Like, at that point, it's not. At that point, it's too much.
They should. I I kind of get it because this a lot. I wonder whether they thought this might be last season, so they wanted to touch upon
Yeah.
some of the guest stars, particularly from the first season and such that they'd had.
I
And
actually
bring them
like
back.
they brought in Captain
Yeah,
Nemo because Captain Nemo is one of the lesser known Disney properties that they made a really fantastic live action from.
mm,
If you've
yeah,
never watched 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, it was so popular they made a Disney ride for it that eventually became a Finding Nemo ride at Disneyland. Like there's a submarine voyage ride that was expressly for Captain Nemo because it was so well loved because they didn't have a lot of steampunk in Disney canon.
mm,
Um, and so you get a lot from that. Like in Haunted Mansion, the in the ride Haunted Mansion, there's an organ, and that organ is from the Captain Nemo movie. Um, and so like you could have made half a season about Captain Nemo and Hook discovering his half brother Liam, and that's
mm,
fine. But then you're just adding in things like I think it's they just stuck with Captain Nemo or with Edmond Dante's non-Disney canon revenge character. That it could have been really it could have been really
mm,
there's something in the bones of it, which I'm going to say again about season 7. There's something in the bones of this that could have been good had it been done by someone else.
yeah,
And it's not to say that the people that wrote it didn't have talent because people still watched it. 3 million people still watched season 7.
mm,
But like there's too much going on, and I just kind of wish they'd picked a lane
yeah.
and they'd stuck with it.
No, I agree. As much as I enjoyed, for example, another big cameo at the beginning of season 6 was the Count of Monte Cristo making an appearance. As much as I enjoyed that, it does feel like you're having way too many guest characters jumping up and such. You should try and, especially if you're going towards the end of the show, as they thought it might be, like try and get more focus. Like make sure you've wrapped up everyone and given like your established cast some proper additional time to flesh out any little bits left to do so. Um, but then again, I mean, it is what it is. We're talking about this in hindsight.
And I
And
mean,
it
like,
was, yeah,
people know the traditions because they used Beowulf in the second half of the season for like a one-up episode. And episode 9, the title of it is Changelings, which could easily be a reference to a theatrical tradition of of fey magic stealing children, which
mm,
is both a Peter Pan thing, but also a really great. Oh, what's the name of the play? There's a really great play about changeling that is like a creepy kind of demonic version. Carol Churchill's Skriker. And so like the people that wrote this obviously had some knowledge of how fairy tales work. It's just they tried to stuff too much. Like the Jekyll and Hyde
yeah,
thing could have been its own season because they did it with Victor Frankenstein where it was its own
yeah.
subplot. Like you could have made that like season 7 could have been the back half of season 6, the Black Fairy.
Mm.
And I argue it's a more successful half season, anyways. So.
Jackal and Hyde again very much underutilized. Jackal actually had some really good magnetic presence, and you for
Who
the
played
one episode.
Jekyll? I'm gonna have to look and see who the actor was. Who played Jekyll?
Remember the face? I cannot remember the name. Um, but he had such a great personality. And when he broke the evil queen out of the psychiatric hospital, um, it almost felt like they were going to have a powerful double act to like take on the heroes, but he came and went within the space of a few episodes.
I can
So it
never
really,
find anyone's name in this darn recurring characters, guest characters, regular cast list. I can't find it. Ah, I'm gonna feel so bad about that. That's gonna haunt me in my dreams.
uh, uh, um, so if I may, so one quick thing, I just want to touch upon my main thing about redemption from season 5,
Yeah.
before I forget. Before I forget, um, the whole redemption thing. Um, if there's one thing I really disliked about the redemption arc in season 5 with the underworld, it's the fact that Cora got redeemed. I did They did this whole like very quick thing of she saw her daughter's forgiveness, both daughters' forgiveness. She brought them together in the space of a minute, and because of that, she got redeemed for all the bad things that she did in her life and ascended to Olympus. And I'm sorry, I just don't buy it.
Look,
Uh,
the actress playing her was very busy that week. She had other things to film and to do. They had 5 minutes, okay. And it's interesting too because Cora is an original character for Once Upon a Time. She doesn't exist. Like the Queen of Hearts exists, but she's never named in Alice in Wonderland, which is
hmm,
one of her characters that she is. But Cora herself is a character that only exists in Once Upon a Time in this way. And so they don't have other things to really draw off of except rumors of things. So in creating original characters, Will Nave, Cora, in some ways I would say Archie as Jiminy Cricket, because he's not really Jiminy Cricket. Like these are
hmm,
not really like Lily, for instance. Lily as the underutilized semi-villainous, semi-revenge villainous. Uh,
hmm,
it's it's one of those things where like when they created an original character out of that, they couldn't just paint them as a fairy tale character, and it seems like that's where they struggled. Henry has shades of that. Balefire has shades of that. Balefire doesn't exist anywhere else.
no.
Um, yeah, so it's one of those things where you can really see both the strength and the weakness in the writer's room. And also, I'm really sad that I didn't care enough about. I mean, we never hear from Liam again. Like, I think we're supposed to care about Liam during the Dark Waters episode, and the reveal is supposed to be this, like, but Hook spends season 6 finding family and finally becoming accepted by Henry, which I think is kind of weird because he's not wanting to be Henry's stepdad. He's kind of wanting to be his friend, but they had these great moments in in soft wishverse, whatever that was. So
Yes.
it's kind of weird that he's looking for Henry's approval because I cannot stress this enough. Henry is 15 years old canonically in season 6, and it's weird to give a 15-year-old that much power.
Oh, oh, Henry's bouts of teen angst, I have to admit, were
Uh,
somewhat amusing to
so
watch.
much.
But
It's parallel with Cinderella and Clorinda story, so it works. So season 6, the back half of season 6 has two kind of recurring themes from the first half. The first is Latin Jasmine, and they have a thinly veiled premise of returning exhausted from trying to find Agrabah in order to give credence to sending Hook to Ariel and Eric's magic love cabana, which is a thing that I would love to have seen at Pleasure Island in Disney World. And the other one is the evil queen who will eventually sacrifice herself because Regina and the evil queen share a heart because some has the light of one, some have the darkness of the other. And it's both very sweet, but leaves a huge plot hole of why doesn't Regina die when the evil queen dies? But it's fine because it's Once Upon a Time. And she has to come back for season 7 as Ronnie, anyways. So season 6, parts 1 and 2 are tenuously linked by the Love Cabana / Aladdin Jasmine and the Evil Queen, who is fabulous but super underutilized, and the very scary almost a little too out of their element in the storybook fantasy realm of Gideon, who seems like there's someone from a way different story and definitely has one motive on their mind.
Hmm. Gideon. I like him, but in looking back in hindsight, I do wonder what the main point of Gideon was beyond the fact of giving Belle and Rumple some sort of connection, which starts to spark them getting back together again for the upteenth time in a
Well,
row
and they
now.
had Morpheus for that too. So they could have just brought back Morpheus instead of bringing on Gideon. I don't mind it. I like a character named Gideon because Morpheus is way too close to Neil Gaiman's Sandman for me, and it's way too much of on the nose for a callback to like Hades or even like Eurydice. It's just it's fine. It's all really season six. The back half really is about Fiona, anyways. Really, everything in season six
Yes.
leads up to the final battle at the end of this. And I actually think the final battle as a two parter is probably one of the more interesting two parters because it not just calls back to the pilot of Once, but
Yes.
it feels really kind of fresh, its own thing. It's very scary. You actually don't know what's going to happen until it happens. Like, I could not, for me, like I could not for me project it. I did like episodes like Where Bluebirds Fly, where the canonical Tin Man, um, like their issues are addressed. I so like there are some good one-off episodes, and they all kind of tie together. The Girls' Night Out is a little out of place for me. Not that Regina shedding a tear is bad because it's nice to see Lana Parilla doing everything. Um, but yeah, it just feels like the
Mm.
second half of season nine all really does lead up to the final battle for me.
Yeah. What did you think of the lesbian episode?
Which one is the lesbian episode? It's not the musical episode.
No, no,
Lesbians
we'll
aren't
touch
really
on
into musicals as much.
no, no. It was where Red gets together with oh, what's her name? Uh from what from Wizard of Oz, Dorothy, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, so I remember that because around that time Supernatural was doing their Wizard of Oz episode, I think. And so like Dorothy getting together with Charlie happened around the same time. It's fine. I'm not mad about it. It seems like it's trying to shoehorn in controversy, doing it one the slate in the game, and doing it two with non-established characters essentially, because we hadn't seen Ruby since season two, and
No.
Mulan and Aurora hadn't been around since season two. So like, it's fine. I'm not mad about it. I'm all for sapphic love affairs on ABC Family Disney Channel, but like, it's fine. It's not anything that
Yeah.
matters. I think would be my problem with it. Like on a show about true love and a show about the melodrama of hope and a show where it's about connection and feeling over plot, to have it
Mm,
be its own thing, it's fine, but like it doesn't at the end of the day mean anything for the main story.
mm,
It's not like everyone in town taking a bit of the sleeping drop, which is a very touching scene.
mm.
Like it doesn't touch me in the way that sleeping drop scene where everyone in town. There's a really great communal aspect to the back half of season six. I really like. It doesn't
Yeah.
seem as insulated.
Whi- mm.
Um, yeah,
Which accumulates with like the rooftop wedding between Emma and Hook, and
that's the
pretty
only
much
good part of the singing episode is that rooftop wedding. That's the only good part of that. Like, God bless Rebecca Madger. God bless them for doing a musical episode. But if you're gonna do a musical episode, make sure your actors can sing first. Like, make sure they don't need 2 years of training to get there. Like, make sure the songs are
Yep.
captivating. The songs in that episode were so on the nose, and I know it's a wish, so I know it's just like people blurting out their feelings, but it feels like something that somebody like wrote in sixth grade and like then brought to life in this multi-million dollar production TV show. And like they could have literally just done an episode about the wedding without the singing and nothing would have changed. And I think that's a problem for me as a musical person is when you add songs to something and call it a musical when a musical is about the melodrama of the song moving the plot along. Even Prom does that. And
Oh,
Prom is not one of the best musicals ever written. Like I just I it's fine because I was rooting for Hook and Emma and we eventually got there, but for me, the final battle is far more important than the song in your heart, which is such an on the nose name of the episode. Like, I'm trying not to get angry about it, but like, I know that TV musical episodes can do well because the Buffy episode is one of the best episodes, maybe of the entire series.
mm,
Um, so yeah, I just get like you go from the origin of Rumpelstiltskin's true destiny in the Black Fairy and the reveal about his mom, the reveal about Fiona, which is really great and really shocking, and it's too bad only 3 million people were watching that. But then you go to the musical episode, and then you actually get the final battle, in which this genius moment of Emma has literally been institutionalized for her beliefs. Like, and this is this frightening, almost American horror stories, claustrophobic,
mm,
maze like feeling. Like this episode is not nature. This episode is not wild. This episode is about containment. This episode is about power. Uh,
yes.
it's it's a great finale to a
It,
show, and it should have stopped there. Like it
it,
was at that point where you could have said, if we're going to reboot it, we're going to do a hard one. We're not bringing back any of these people. We're going to start over. We can do it again. But like the idea that this woman is so obsessed with rewriting magic, it's not just about happy endings anymore, that it's gone so much farther than that. And like to do that, institutionalizing, like I cannot, I think too, it gives a good feeling to both the monotony and the powerlessness of being institutionalized. So I think
mm,
that's a good callback to like women's rights struggle. It's almost a callback to like
yes.
Mary Poppins, where the mother is fighting for the rights of women in some ways. So it's good for Disney, it's good for the narrative, and they should have just stopped there. I think the final battle is a
You-
supreme 2 episode, and it makes the choice where it also makes the Sailor Moon choice, because in the finale of Sailor Moon, Sailor Moon has this great like beautiful power sword weapon, and her ultimate choice is not to use it to strike, but to give it up and to actually hand it over to the villain, who's a corrupted version of the sun. And like
mm,
so Emma makes this same choice not to battle in order to win. And so there's actually a really great melodrama anime construct to that choice,
mm,
um, that is both revolutionary for the Disney brand and works in context of how violent season 1 is in some ways. And it works in context to the idea of here, Henry is actually needed because Henry is the reason things happen for Emma in a lot of this episode, because I think Henry and Gold are the only ones that remember anything, and Gold is so concentrated on his mom that it really does fall to Henry to save the world.
mm.
And it's the one time where I feel like it was since the pilot, it's the one time where I feel like he's such a necessity this episode would fall apart without him.
Mm, indeed. Uh, I could, let me think. So you were mentioning before about it referencing different things. Oh, I've lost my point. Sorry. I
No,
had a point.
I had a lot to say. I thought because I
Yes.
dig on this show so much, it was important for me to say no. There's something the show does really well, because often when we critique stuff, we only really I feel like we only critique things so we can crap on the stuff we don't like instead of uplifting the stuff that's important. And I do think there's some really great stuff. Steve Perlman, who's one of the head writers for this episode or head director, also did the Girls' Night Out episode where Aladdin and Jasmine come back. Um, so it's someone that understands the characters a little bit.
Mm,
Ralph Hemaker, who is the other one who's kind of cast, did the Heartless episode, where the evil queen wants to destroy Storybook using the River of Lost Souls. Um, And so that leads to the beginning of that sleeping curse and the beautiful scene where we get with the people later, all taking on about a bit of the sleeping curse in order to save Snow and David. So like there's actual people kind of leading this charge for the final battle that
Yes.
understand the power of the show in both the
Mm.
good and bad ways.
I remember what I was going to mention as a reference. You mentioned about Emma being institutionalized, about sort of almost like them trying to convince her what her reality was is a fantasy and this is reality. It almost harkens to Alice in Wonderland in that aspect, and particularly American McGee's Alice in Wonderland.
Well, and
If
there's versions of Alice in Wonderland that are done now where it's a critique on Alice's fantasy. There's a couple of really great
yes.
young adult novels about
Mm,
people that follow Alice and they watch how she creates carnage in her wake when she does stuff. So there's this really great YA tradition, especially
yes.
a
Mm,
young adult tradition
uh,
of kind of deconstructing
yes.
Wonderland. But yeah.
And something you have to notice about the aesthetic of this new storybook, um, it like everything from there's a slight different tint of color to it. There's definitely a different essence and feel to it. So it definitely feels a, quite like almost like a twisted world. Well, it really is because it's Fiona's version of reality, created by her curse. Um, and I think that's a really great contrast because you've by changing the aesthetic a little bit with the coloration and such, it stands out quite starkly when you do have those moments when the script flips back to the rest of the cast and all the other worlds are breaking down, reality basically breaking down into nothingness as Fiona's slowly but surely winning. Um, I don't know if I totally liked the idea of the belief of the savior was now so explicitly tied to reality that was going to cause everything to collapse if she lost.
I think that was because it
Um,
was the end of the show. I think if it had
it
been
was.
another season, it would have just been like maybe they would have lost Rapunzel's area of the forest or something where there's no one there anymore.
Yes.
But it's an interesting like this is the finale of the show. It's very much like we have
Yeah.
to break down the sets, so we're going to make sure to actually break down the sets on camera.
I mean, I do agree that it did raise the stakes for the final two-parter quite nicely.
Yeah.
I don't think we saw quite the stakes being risen so high until the last episodes of season 7, with Evil Rumple basically almost winning and gaining total power. I
Well,
think this
and
really
the
does.
evil queen doesn't have enough to sacrifice unless you give her a reason to sacrifice. And so if
Yes.
you really want to give Regina that full mother of all moment in like that kind of white outfit that we get at
Mm.
the end of the show, like you can't have the evil queen still around. So you also have to get rid of the evil queen. So you paint yourself into a corner and then you paint the rest of the corner and you're
Well,
just still in.
well, from what I recall, the evil queen herself still lives. She's just living in the Wish realm now with the other Robin, whereas Regina
Oh.
is still around. No, the evil queen never died. She's just
Oh,
in the Wish realm.
I misunderstood that completely then. Well, that makes it a little less strong for me. But
When everything was restored, the Wish realm was as well because it's now a separate aspect of reality. And I believe the final. Sorry, you were going to say?
yeah, it's one of those things where like, listen, I didn't actually watch all of season 7.
Oh,
Well, I did. I It's one of those things where like I was doing a screenwriting competition and I wrote a alternate pilot for season 7 actually.
mm,
Um and it's what I'm going to say about season 7 is how I feel about a lot of some of the middle of ones is that there's some good bones there, but it gets in
yes.
its own way. And so like the finale of 6 is really great in a lot of ways, but in some ways because of what it is, it does get in its own way a little bit. Um, and that
Mm,
just is what it is. That's the nature of
yeah.
when you set up such a genre heavy show, something that is depending so much on this kind of vague notion of hope and of the heart. Um, I'm just glad there was sword fighting, really, at the end of the day. because it could have gone into like a weird Hallmark when calls are where everything is magic driven. So I'm glad there were like action aspects to break that up in a lot of ways.
Mm, yes. So I think so. To harken back to something that you were saying before, um, I agree that so the ending was great, and especially that very last supper esque scene you get in Storybrooke, which really, to my mind, is the very last scene of the first six seasons of the show. That could have been taken as a very fitting conclusion of everyone around the table, that their story has come to a natural end. Um, Now, I do agree that this whole thing with like the soft reboot of trying to redo everything, um, and sort of launch a new, sort of like a new Once Upon a Time off that, it didn't work. I think there was a bit too much baggage from the first six seasons that they
And
were trying to bring
yeah,
over.
and you have enough Disney canon that you could have done something really different. Weaver
Yeah.
didn't have to be Rumpelstiltskin. Weaver could have been, if we're doing non-Disney canon characters, Weaver could have literally been the spider from Charlotte's Web.
Yeah.
If you're bringing in Eloise, there's absolutely no reason. There's not really much Rumple does here except to become Carl from Up, essentially, at the end of the day. It takes so long to get to the reveal of Belle's death being a thing that, like, we've got so much happening in this season. And I there's so many good bones here. The stuff with Alice, the stuff with people being locked in towers is really strong. I think Hook,
Hmm.
Rapunzel, and Alice as a story could have been its own thing. I think here
Yeah.
the problem with season 7 is twofold. The move to Seattle feels too much like they're trying to grab the audience from Grimm, which at this point is kind of on its upswing. And so they're trying to grab the audience from the Pacific Northwest by moving it. But with them moving
Mm.
it to a neighborhood where you can easily leave the neighborhood, you kind of lose the otherness of Storybrooke where it's isolated.
Yes.
So you
Mm.
lose that by making it in the middle of a bustling city. Um, and the other part of it is, what's the other part of it? So there were two things that really made it kind of not work for me, and it's that part of it. And I had the other part in my brain. Um, there's there's so much that happens in this where it feels like I've seen it other places in the series. Um, and it would have been fine if it had been its own thing. It just like if this had been its own set of characters and it had just been a new story is revealed and they
Mm.
had brought back all the people, like it's fine, but there was just something that felt like there wasn't any call for season 7. There was nothing here there's nothing here that I didn't get in a different way satisfyingly in the other part of it. The other thing I had a problem with in season 7 is that I never felt that Once Upon a Time was about class and was about like lower class, upper class. I felt
Mm.
like season 7 for a lot of it with Cinderella versus Tremaine, this version of
Yeah.
Cinderella was pushing this idea of rising up and rebellion, which isn't bad because that's part of Snow White's journey, but because Once Upon a Time is about love and heart and redemption and
Mm.
hope, adding in stuff about class warfare is a choice that distracts and doesn't work. Like if it had
Yeah.
been its own Once Upon a Time where it was more about the rebellion and less about the relationship, if it had not really been about Henry Mills being reawakened to believe in magic so we could be reunited with this version of Cinderella. It could have been different if it had just been about Anastasia and Gothel and Rapunzel and Hook. That could have even worked. I think
Yeah.
the downfall of it is it's Once Upon a Time. It has the legacy of love to live up to, and it can't really you can't make a Les Miserables story where it's about love in the midst of a tragic rebellion. Like it needs to be in the version that I wrote, it was more about Ronnie, Lana Priya's Regina character. It was more about her leading this kind of neighborhood uprising against Tremaine. And it was more about the idea of a character of Rumpelstiltskin being named Weaver is so on the nose. You can't make him like weaving stuff. Like you can't not make him into a spider character. And that paints him into a corner if you want him to have redemption. Um, and calling Hook Rogers in this like new triple cursed character, like it's so on the nose. And it makes me a little upset. And then he brings Zelena back for 2 episodes, and then all of a sudden she's in like San Francisco in like a Charmed spinoff with her husband that accepts her for being evil. It's like it's not satisfying. It doesn't mean anything. If you've never connected with Zelena, why did Regina need her anyways? What is she bringing?
Oh,
It's a whole thing where it's like I don't. It doesn't. Why? A lot of season 7 for me, even if I like the choices like the community garden and the magic being under it, I'm still left at the end of the season going, why is this here? Why isn't its own thing? It could have been once upon a time a new chapter, like Saved by the Bell, a
yes.
new class. Like it could have been its own thing. It didn't have to be Fuller
Yeah.
House where it's an unsatisfying ghost of the original. Although there are a
I,
lot more female directors in this season. Like Lana Parilla got to direct, Ellen Pressman directs, Tessa Blake. There's a lot more female voices at the head
yeah.
than there
Mm,
are in the other seasons. So there's at least that,
mm.
which I appreciate.
So I agree with you. I think that what they should have logically done, maybe taken a year or two gap between the first set of Once Upon a Time and then don't have any sort of like hook ending thing of like, oh, by the way, Henry, I'm your daughter, etc. But don't do that. Instead, do a fresh start of, as you say, Once Upon a Time, a new storybook, something like that. Almost have it set within the same universe, and you can even bring in guest characters and such, but allow it to have its own identity. Um, there was way too much that they brought over. I know why they did it, because, in all honesty, um, Lana Perry, Robert Carlyle, they were like the draws of Once Upon a Time. That's they were they were the actors and the characters they played that really got people watching the show. So I get that, but you could still have. They made a big thing of like um, characters having alternative universe versions of themselves. That is what this Hook is in this 7th season. He's an alternative universe version of the original Hook, and he could tell his own story, and they did. So I think it would have been sensible to have done something similar with the evil queen, rather than give Regina another alternative personality, to go alongside her existing one
And then
when
you
she's
have, because you
Regina.
have to bump
Um,
with the melodrama, you have characters like Eloise,
yeah.
who's not
Um,
Disney canon. They could have brought in Madeline. If they're going to do non-Disney canon, strong, young female characters, why wouldn't you bring in Madeline? So angry about it. Because Eloise
yeah.
is not nearly as captivating. But like, even in the description of the characters, they talk about the cult of Eloise, and I'm just like, I'm so disconnected from the show at this point. I watched that episode. I don't know what they're referencing. Like, I know she did mind games, but like, in my mind, really there's a couple of really bright spots. Gothel as a nymph is a really interesting idea. I don't think it's thought through. And the idea of Gothel becoming evil and destroying like this weird found family she tried to create for herself because she wanted something. There were good bones there. And the reveal of Alice connected to Hook and Rapunzel is not bad. Like there's a lot. It feels like they needed to like workshop it. It was like it was the first draft of the production got filmed, and no one said maybe we should step back and take a look at the message we're trying to send in the world.
Yeah. So so I want to briefly touch on a few points that you made previously, just to give my thoughts on them
Of course, yeah.
and such quickly. Sorry, because you talked about the setting location before. Um, so Hyperion Heights, it definitely pales in comparison to Storybrooke as a setting. I think it's way too vague, like saying, "Oh, it's a neighborhood in Seattle." Where's the boundaries? Where's the lines? What is the magical
I
part?
I will
that
say for
compared to-
anyone that's never lived in Seattle, Seattle is really hard to navigate. So in a way, if you're a Seattle native, you understand when someone says Seattle neighborhood that they mean like this impenetrable maze of like crisscrossing streets that could have like a boundary feeling to it. But once again, it's not isolated enough to be its own thing,
No,
and you can leave it. Eventually you will find yourself in a different neighborhood, and so it's very much like it feels like trying to capture the audience from Grimm or from the librarians, where it's a world within a world, where it's magic within a city, where it's got this Harry Dresden magician's feel. But that's
yeah,
not what Once Upon
it's
a Time is.
no, no, it wasn't. And this whole thing of that Tremaine's trying to buy out people's businesses to sort of force them to move on and such, like I don't quite
They're under a
understand
curse. They don't
how that.
know. You're just being evil
Yeah,
for the sake of evil at that point.
she yeah, really is. I mean, I did enjoy the twist of the fact that it wasn't Tremaine, it was Drizella. That I think it was Drizella. That was
Yeah,
the one that was actually responsible.
Drizella. She's
It was
always the side character in a Cinderella story. The Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister, Cinderella 2 or Cinderella 3, one of the direct to DVDs. She's always like the evil stepsister that has the more interesting backstory. Drizella's always the Cinderella character that gets like her second coming in the sequel. Interestingly enough, so.
Yeah. Um, sorry, I've forgotten what my point was now. Um,
No, it's interesting. Did you like Dr. Facilier? Did you think
uh,
Facilier was well used?
oh, sorry, I was just going to go on about Drizella a bit more
No,
quickly.
you should do that.
Sorry,
I was trying to make jog your
sorry.
memory.
So Drizella definitely okay. So they reused a lot of stuff from the earlier seasons of Once. Drizella came across as Evil Queen Light. She was trying to be this sexy, manipulative young woman, but I mean, come on, you still had Regina, you still had Lana Parilla and everything. She, I know, she was Regina's apprentice in a sense, but she didn't really have beyond like being controlled temporarily. She really didn't have much going for her, so you couldn't imagine her as a long-term villain, if that made sense.
Yeah.
Um, of you mentioned Facilier, another example of things that are underutilized. If we're going to talk about underutilized as well,
Hansel, aka the Candy Killer. I mean, come on. They paid someone to write that. I can't. It's just one of those things. They paid someone to write that.
um, yeah. So if we're talking about underutilized, yeah, Facilier was, and so was the Coven of the Eight concept. You mentioned about Eloise and being an nymph and everything, but this comes back to the fact is they gave Once Upon a Time the reboot. They were going to see how the season was going to go, and then midway through, the studio turns around and says, "Sorry, we're going to have to cancel the show. So you're going to have to bring everything to an end." So obviously, it was very clear a case of they were rushing to conclude all of the existing business with Eloise's plot and everything. That's why Facilier got killed off so abruptly, even though they were bigging up him and the Evil Queen to have a path together and such. And then they rushed through into Rumple's final stand, basically. Because it was clear that they'd known all along how Rumple's story was going to end. But I do get the feeling it was going to end in like another couple of seasons. They were going to give everyone probably like a few seasons of this new reboot to really flesh out. They're probably going to bring in like some more guest stars and such. Because from Princess and the Frog, I think the only major character we didn't meet was the wise old lady of the swamp. What was her name?
Well,
Madam.
they dip down. They never have 3 million viewers. The opening episode got 3.26, but by the time we get to the finale, they've dipped down under 2 million people watching. Like
Hmm.
the episode where Henry's older self talks to his younger self got 1.98 million. So if you're just looking purely at numbers, going from essentially 11 to 1.9, it's it's hard, and it's a
Yeah.
specialized show is the other part of it, and it's just one of those things where I want you to be able to give your final thoughts, but it's about time to start wrapping up here. I don't want anything to get kind of lost as a train of thought here.
Yeah. Um. So, so should we briefly conclude on how season 7 finished, and then just give our final thoughts on once overall?
Yeah, I kind of want to give this to you because for me, I think
Yeah.
I've said a lot of
Okay.
how I felt about the season, and I think you have more of a passion view for it. So I kind of want to just give you the mic, and I'm going to give you the kind of the last 7 minutes of the episode to just talk about once all the good and the bad
Okay.
and everything it means to you. Yeah,
Oh
it's
yeah.
the microphone is yours.
Thank you, sir. Um. So yes, clearly they knew where Rumpel's story was going to finish, and to be honest, he and Regina, they were pretty much the two core components of Once left over that hadn't been fully finished yet. Um, you had Charming and Snow's story that come to natural conclusion because they managed to find their happy ending together. They found their daughter, and they were able to start going forward with their lives and everything. Um, Regina found more redemption by having her protege and also helping her son blossom in his life as well. And Rumpel finally managed to find peace with himself and finally find that little bit of pure, unfiltered courage to stand up to his own inner darkness, which he did. And in doing so, saved everyone. Um, and then you had the very last part of the series with Regina being crowned the good queen, and she has come full circle back to herself, her original pure nice self before everything happened to her. And her little speech at the end when she talks about the good stuff that happens in life and you will go through the bad stuff, and that you have to keep hope in the end. It is actually such a powerful little speech. And it does come across that, again, they knew how Rumpel's story was going to finish. They knew how Regina's story was going to finish. And the fact that they still did justice to it it's a really good example of why Once it's such a great thing to watch. We've talked a lot about Once and all of its like positive parts and its flaws. I would think that the fact that we've spoken 4 episodes about it and we've barely scratched the surface of everything that we could discuss about Once Upon a Time shows that beneath its surface of a fairy tale um, show, there's an immense amount of depth to it. There's a lot of characterization, a lot that people go through. There is a reason why people are really into it as a show. I have to admit, I'm very surprised that there hasn't been expanded universe stuff about it. They've done some stuff, they did a few comic books whilst Once was around, and a couple of novels. But since then, we haven't really heard much about Once Upon a Time. And that does surprise me. And I do hope that going forward, there is enough interest from the fandom that Disney and ABC will take notice and they will give us more stuff. I wouldn't be surprised down the line if we either got a reboot or a spin-off because that is the most tempting thing for studios to do these days. But at the very least, please just give us more expanded universe novels, because there's so many stories to tell. They did Snow White and Charming for the first lot. They tried to do Cinderella and her Princess Henry for this lot. I think there's scope to do a proper Beauty and the Beast story where they're the central focus, not Rumple and co, but a different set of characters altogether. Obviously, Little Mermaid Ariel, Aladdin Jasmine. I don't mind if they keep the same characters but show their further adventures, so to speak. I think there's a great deal of scope for it, and I really do hope that they do more of it one day. But for now, I am grateful, really, really grateful that Once existed and gave us a proper piece of over the top, melodramatic, real life Disney fare to enjoy.
What do you want people to take away from Once? Like as a viewer and someone who loves it so dearly, um, like I ask people this when they talk about Buffy or when they talk about Supernatural. I always
Mm.
ask, what do you want someone to take away from this thing that you love so much? What is this? Like if you can like not distill it down, but what do you want people to get from it that they might be distracted by other things? Like what's at the center of the show for you?
I think
Besides
at the
besides Lana Parilla's cleavage, because for me
oh,
that's part of the center of the show. But I think that's for everyone,
well,
gay and straight alike. So.
yeah, no joke. One quick thing about that: my boyfriend absolutely loves it. Lana Parilla as the Evil Queen must be his favorite character of all time, and he's been bugging me to do some characters in future stories that reference that version of the Evil Queen. So if you're going to see a powerful Twinkie prince walking around in big flashy outfits one day from me, that's the reason why. In terms of what I want people to take away from this is one of the core tenets of the show is even if you lose your way and you might do bad things, there's no reason why you can't hold hope in your heart that you can find your way back again and that you can make something of yourself and your life. Because that is, the characters good and bad in Once. Um, to some degree, they all at times lost their way, but they were able to find themselves again and become the better versions of themselves that they wanted to be. And the way they did it is they just held on to hope at the end of the day, and they moved forward, and they learned to love each other and respect each other. And I think that's such a powerful thing for people to take from the show, that is very much a possibility.
I think that's a great way to end too. Thank you everyone for being a part of this experience. This is 4 episodes. It was amazing. I'm never doing another 4 episode arc of anything ever again.